Hi, I'm Mr. Vitale, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about managing stress and anxiety. So in this video, we're going to talk about the fifth AP scenario, what struggling looks like versus drowning, thinking errors, self-care, and resources for your emotional health. Here's the scenario. I don't know what to do. I'm struggling with the pressure to do well in all of my classes and my sport. Everyone is expecting me to do well, but all I can do is just stay in bed and scroll through my phone. My parents will kill me if I get a B, and my coach is expecting big things from me this Saturday at the game. I'm going to fail everything. So if you need to, pause this video and just think about what you would do in this scenario if you've ever felt this way, and what steps you would take, and how would you include your teacher in this scenario. So go ahead and pause it. Okay. So the first thing we need to talk about is struggling versus drowning. If you're a freshman coming in from 8th grade, it may be that you're used to getting 100% all the time. You might be used to just getting all the information and just knowing it right away. This is not learning, and I talk about this a lot, and those that have had me before will know that this is a very hot issue for me. But learning is struggling, and that sounds awful in the sense that it's like, oh, you want me to struggle? Well, think about any time you've ever learned something. You had to practice it. You had to fail a few times. I mean, just, an obvious example is learning how to ride a bike. No one just gets on a bike and just does it perfectly the first time. You have to struggle. You fall over, you learn the balance, you learn to move and use the pedals. And there's different ways people do it. I mean, when I learned how to ride a bike, I rode a bike against a fence so that I wouldn't, if I fell over, I would just fall into the fence. Some people use, training wheels. Some people just hop on and just by themselves, just try it. Some people have their parents behind them, pushing them. I mean, it doesn't matter how you do it, but the idea is that you weren't perfect in the beginning. You didn't know how to do it at one point, and through a process of struggling, falling over, you learn how to do it. Now, in some classes that you might have excelled in, you were told something, you memorized it, and then you gave that information back, and you were just 100% right from the get-go. That wasn't learning. That was remembering. And you might be really good at remembering things, but that's not what you're going to be doing in an AP class. That's not the only thing you're going to be doing in an AP class. So I really need you to know, and this is super important, you may not understand it yet, but learning is struggling. And if you're struggling, that's okay. But you need to know when you cross the line from struggling to drowning, because if you're struggling and you're like, oh, this is fine, and then there's just a point where there's no return, right? So you need to be able to identify when it is that you're struggling and you're learning, and when it is that you're just straight up drowning. So some ideas that I have for you to be able to identify that is, struggling is when you are really like into something and you're trying to figure something out. Maybe you're getting it wrong, but you're like, man, I want to know the answer to that. And you keep figuring out, you ask questions, and then you're like, oh, I get that. And then you try another one and maybe you get that right. Or maybe, you get it wrong, but you're like a little bit closer and you're like, okay, now I know my mistake. That's struggling. Drowning is when you get something wrong and then you don't understand, you don't ask for help, or maybe you don't know how to ask for help, and then just everything just kind of keeps piling up. You don't do your work, you're just not paying attention in class. Like, these are things that are going to eventually get you to a place where you're not going to be able to come back, and you're definitely not learning as you're, just straight up not doing anything or not understanding anything. So it's up to you to understand what the difference between those two are. And you can always ask for help, whether you're struggling or whether you're drowning, but I'll try to help you navigate that as well. I think one thing, though, that makes people feel like they're drowning when they're really not is something called thinking errors, which we're going to talk about in this next slide. So a thinking error is something that I actually learned from my wife, who is a therapist, a mental health therapist. And a thinking error is, I have this graphic that I found from marigoldcounseling.com, and It kind of summarizes a few common ones. And I'm telling you, once I read this over, I was like, yep, a lot of my students have done this. And I'm sure some of you have done this as well. So just think about it. These are some of the different ones. There's all or nothing. I'm perfect or a failure. And so is everyone else. And by the way, everybody does this. So this is not something like when you have a thinking error, it's not because there's something wrong with you. Everybody does these at some point. It's just how often do you do them and do you recognize them? So, I am perfect or a failure. So like maybe you're getting hundreds, and then all of a sudden you get a 95. And now it's like, I'm a failure. I failed. I'm the worst. That's all or nothing. Why can't you be great with a 95 or like mostly the best? But you know what I mean? So that's one example. Another one is blaming. It's too hard to accept my responsibility for my feelings, so I will blame others for my pain. So maybe you're mad at everyone else because they're getting better grades than you are. Or maybe you're mad at me because I'm not teaching it well enough. But sometimes it's okay to be upset that you're not doing well. And it doesn't have to be anyone's fault. You know what I mean? So you don't have to be mad at people for something that is just accept your feelings. I'm just going to skip around here. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I like catastrophizing. So that's the top one there. I expect the worst will happen every time. I've had students that are like, I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail. Well, it's like, probably not. And most of the time, the students that say that end up not failing because, most of my students don't fail tests very often. So, I think that's not a very healthy thought to have, that just thinking, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail. Or like shoulds and musts. There's a difference between things that you should do and things that you must do. And I talked about this in another video, but studying, for example, is a big thing. Like students are like, I need to study 6 hours tonight. I need to go home and memorize all the vocab words from this unit. No, you don't. I mean, maybe you should. Maybe you should go home and study for 4 hours, but must you? Is somebody like forcing you? And maybe they are. Maybe your parents are going to lock you in your room. I don't know. But sometimes I think students make themselves do things that they feel like is best for them, but is actually not really. Like I knew someone in college that would just study for 6 hours at a time in the library, and they felt like that was helping, like they felt that was something that they needed to do. And I can guarantee you that probably didn't help more than if they just studied for 1 or 2 hours. But anyway, these are all just examples of thinking errors. And the way to overcome this is to identify them. So when you start thinking, I'm going to fail, or I need to do all of my work tonight, I need to do all of it after practice, just ask yourself, is that really true? Just like stop and just challenge yourself. Am I really a failure if I get a 95? Am I a failure if I get an 85? Am I a failure if I get a 0? And like really think about that. I know, somebody's laughing right now. They're like, oh yeah, you got a 0, you failed. But like, does that make you a failure? Especially if you really tried. Like, I don't think that makes somebody a failure necessarily all by itself. What if you had a bad day? What if something's going on? What if you're not, you were out for a long period of time? So you need to challenge yourself and recognize that you're in a thinking error. And the way that you get out of that is to just challenge it and then think of what would make the situation better, right? Like if you're like, I'm going to fail, be like, okay, I feel like I'm going to fail. Am I? Probably not. But why do I feel that way? Is there something I could do to help? And reference any of the other videos to figure out what that is. Blaming. Mr. Vitale doesn't teach the class well enough, so I don't get anything. Okay, well, is that true? Maybe. And if it is, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to keep doing poorly and blame it on Mr. Vitale? Or are you going to talk to Mr. Vitale? Are you going to go seek resources elsewhere because Mr. Vitale doesn't do a good enough job, so now you're going to go and watch Khan Academy videos? I mean, you have control here to do something with these thoughts, and you need to face them and challenge them. And I will say, it says in the bottom right corner, it says they can help manage depression and anxiety. And, it's a tough topic to talk about, but there are students, unfortunately, lots of students that deal with definitely anxiety and even some depression. And challenging these thoughts is a way to combat that. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only way to get rid of anxiety or depression. That's not realistic, but it is a way that can help, and that can help keep you afloat. Obviously, at any time, if you need to go talk to somebody. And we'll talk about resources at the very end. The next thing I want to talk about is self-care. This one is controversial a little bit with my students because I don't think that they realize that taking care of yourself is going to lead you to be happier, obviously, but also to be the most productive version of yourself. And I talked about this in other videos. I hinted at it now, but we always bring up this idea of studying, right? Studying for 6 hours, making flashcards that are this thick and doing them over and over and over and over and over again. The question is, how much of it would be nice, and I would love this, if the amount of work that you put in would equal the stuff that you gained, right? Like if you worked for 6 hours and that meant that you were going to get an A. And if you only worked for 4 hours, that meant you were going to get a B, and so on. But that's not how life works. I mean, it doesn't matter how hard you work sometimes. It just depends on how well you do. And that depends on other factors besides how much you study. And I like to equate this to thinking about recharging a battery, or being an athlete. If you're an athlete and you're practicing every day for 12 hours, all you do is practice, right? And then the game comes and you're tired, your muscles are sore, you literally can't think about what to do because you're just so tired and exhausted. You wouldn't want to play a game like that, right? So you practice, and then you rest. You stretch your legs. You just kind of take your mind off of things. You listen to music. You get ready. You get in the zone for the game, right? You don't just practice till you're tired, stay up late, and then tomorrow expect to be amazing at the game. So why would you do that for school? Why would you study until 4 in the morning and then wake up at 6 in the morning and then take your test? That makes no sense. So the best way that you can ensure that you're going to do the best that you can possibly do is participate in class, practice, but always ensure that you're giving yourself some time for self-care. And this is not just for AP students, it's for anybody. It's for adults, and I have to look at this sometimes, but you need to identify what kind of self-care you like to do and what makes you feel relaxed. So for example, this image has a couple things. Taking a step back, asking for help, spending time alone, putting yourself first, asking what you need, setting boundaries, a big one, staying at home, saying no, forgiving yourself. Let me give you a couple examples that I think are self-care. For me, playing a video game is self-care. Organizing things is self-care. I like to be organized. Eating a dessert, or just, relaxing, just laying down and doing nothing. These are self-care for me. But it's different for other people. Some people maybe like to just talk to friends. Some people like to listen to music. Some people like to take a bath. Some people like to run as self-care. So I challenge you right now to just pause the video, make a list of at least 3 of the top things that you identify as being self-care for you. What would make you relaxed? And start practicing them right now. You don't have to wait until things get stressful to do it. Start making sure that you have these things in your routine now so that you can constantly be not stressed out, or at least, as refreshed as possible. Another thing I want to bring up, and I know this is a long video, but I'm really passionate about this. I want to make sure that you guys are okay. But a lot of students load up, and I know with COVID things will be different, but in general, a lot of students load up on hard classes, AP and honors. They have responsibilities at home, they have sports, they have clubs, and they just load on all of these things. And I really want to challenge you to ask yourself a couple things. First of all, do you want to be in all of the things that you're in? Do you really need to do 4 clubs and 2 sports? Do you really want to do those things? And if you do, that's fine. But just understand that, like, colleges, I know a lot of this comes down to like college, right? You want to impress the college. Colleges want somebody that is well-rounded, that is able to relax and produce well, not be a anxious mess that like is just constantly doing, half-butting things. Like, that's not going to be good for you in college. It's not going to be good for you now. So I really challenge you to just do the things that make you the happiest, and do the things, and that'll like let you flourish. And I think that that's the best thing that you could do. And colleges will notice that you're really going hard on something, and that's going to be impressive. Not that you're in a million things. That's not really impressive necessarily by itself. Especially if you're struggling and getting, B's, C's, D's on things because you're just so spread thin, or you're not even like doing well in a sport because you just can't focus on it. So I really want you to look at what is something that you really love to do and focus on those. But don't forget to always have some self-care. Finally, some resources for social emotional health. Always speak to somebody, and I say start with friends and family and teachers, just because these people are not necessarily the most qualified to help you if you're really struggling with depression and anxiety. But just sometimes, like, these are the most accessible people, the people that are around you, and it's just always just reach out to somebody. Like, I'm struggling, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed. Reach out to somebody and let them know. And if you're listening to somebody, make sure you take them seriously. Of course, guidance counselors, this is their job. Reach out to them, know which one is your guidance counselor. We also have a SAC counselor who deals with certain issues like this specifically. So make sure you know who's available to you, and reach out to them as well. That's their job. They would love to help you. And I actually have one more thing real quick that I want to show you. I found this link. It's classroommentalhealth.org. And it talks about managing stress. And, are you experiencing too much stress, difficulty concentrating, increased worrying, trouble completing assignments on time, not going to class, short temper, tension, headaches, tight muscles, changing in eating habits, changing in sleeping habits? If you're experiencing this, you're really stressed. You can read this on your own. I'm not going to read it to you. But there's a whole list of ways of reducing and managing stress that I really, really want you to read over, especially if you're experiencing this stuff. But really just taking control, that's a big thing, right? Setting a schedule for yourself, being in charge of your own routine, that's a great way to manage stress. Setting goals, avoiding procrastination. If everything piles up at the end, of course that's going to be an issue. Exercise, make sure you get sleep. A lot of times sleep is key. If you just make sure you get your 8 hours of sleep or 9 hours of sleep, sometimes that's all you need to just feel refreshed. Meditation, limit stimulants like caffeine. I see some of my students coming in with caffeine. Try not to do that, guys. Caffeine's a drug. It affects your body. It affects your tolerance of the drug, and it makes you dependent on it, and that's not good either. But it also, and I drink caffeine, it also sometimes makes me anxious, and it makes me feel like I'm not doing enough, and it makes me feel bad, even if I have like 2 cups. Realize you have limits. Set boundaries. Say, I am not going to spend more than an hour on studying. That's good. That's okay. You're not a better student because you spend 4 hours studying. That doesn't make you better. Just be realistic and be true to yourself. There's more here that you can read on your own. I already went like way over my time here, but I really hope that you can kind of look at this and be serious about it, and just really take seriously your self-care. Take care of yourself, and everything else will take care of itself. All right? Talk to you later.